Chapter 1. Exit Interview. August 14th. I want to be clear about what this is. This is an exit interview. That's all it is. I requested the transfer, the regional office approved the transfer, and the facility policy requires a recorded debrief before a senior technician clears his locker. I'm aware this recording goes into the administrative archive. I've worked here long enough to know how the archive works, what gets reviewed and what doesn't, and who has access to what. I want to be clear about that too. My name is Darnell Cruz. I've been a senior operations technician at Kessler Pumped Storage Station for 11 years, 8 months, and 14 days. The last 4 of those years I've held the overnight maintenance rotation, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights on, 2 nights off, through whatever Eastern Tennessee decides to do with the weather. I know this facility the way you know a house you've lived in for a decade. I know which corridor smells like standing water after heavy rain. I know which fluorescent fixture in the lower service hallway takes 40 seconds to fully warm up. I know the exact sound the Unit 2 turbine makes at peak RPM versus 90%. And I know the difference between the harmonic that means everything is operating correctly and the harmonic that means something has come slightly loose in the runner assembly. I know this place. What I'm going to tell you is what I documented. I'm going to walk through my shift logs from the last 8 weeks in order, because that's what the exit debrief protocol asks for, and because telling it in order is the only way it makes sense. I'm going to tell you what I observed, what I investigated, what I concluded, and what I chose to do about it. I'm going to tell you all of that clearly and without exaggeration. And then I'm going to tell you the one thing I didn't put in the official logs. The exit interview is recorded and archived here. I know that. That's fine. Pause Kessler Pumped Storage Station sits in the Osage Valley, about 40 minutes east of Ridgecroft on Route 11. If you've driven that stretch of road, you've seen the upper reservoir, a long, flat body of water that sits up on the ridge like it doesn't quite belong there, held by an earthen dam that was finished in 1986. The lower reservoir is the natural one, a river-fed impoundment that's been there since the valley was dammed in 1961 for flood control. Kessler connects them vertically. That's the whole job. During off-peak hours, overnight mostly, but also weekend middays when demand is low and grid prices are low, we pump water from the lower reservoir up through the penstocks to the upper reservoir. We're consuming power to do that, drawing from the regional grid. Then, when demand spikes, morning ramp-up, hot afternoon air conditioning loads, anything that stresses the grid, we reverse. We open the gates, water falls from the upper reservoir down through the penstocks, spins the turbines, and we put power back onto the grid. Sometimes we pump for 6 hours and generate for 2. Sometimes the balance is different. The regional dispatch center tells us what they need, and we operate accordingly. It's a battery, essentially. A very large, very slow, very wet battery. The facility has 2 units. Unit 1 came online in 1987. Unit 2 followed in 1989. They share a turbine hall carved into the bedrock below the lower reservoir's shoreline, which means the turbine hall is underground, which means I have spent 4 years working in a room built inside a hill next to a river, and I've gotten comfortable with that. The control room is 1 level up from the turbine hall, connected by an internal staircase. Above the control room is the administrative level, supervisor's office, records room, break room, and the main entrance. Below the turbine hall is a service level for primary mechanical access, pump bearings, seal assemblies, and the lower penstock connections. Below that, as far as every current facility document is concerned, is bedrock. That's how I understood the facility when I started here. That's how I understood it until 8 weeks ago. Let me start with what the logs say. Chapter 2. The first 6 weeks were normal. For the first 6 weeks I'm covering, the logs are clean. I want to establish that clearly, because it's going to matter. June 1st through July 13th, Kessler ran exactly as it was supposed to run. Pump cycles held steady, generation output matched dispatch orders within 0.5%. No significant equipment events, no anomalous readings. Marcus Webb, junior tech on the overnight rotation with me for the last 2 years. And I ran clean shifts. We drank too much coffee. We argued about whether the Unit 1 runner was developing a vibration pattern, or whether Marcus was just listening for one because he'd read something online. Normal stuff. I want to tell you a little about Marcus because he matters to what comes later and because I don't want to shortchange him. Marcus is 31. He came out of a 2-year technical program at Ridgecroft Community College and has been at Kessler for 4 years. He's good at this job in a quiet way, not showy, not fast, but careful and systematic. He checks things twice without being told to. He keeps his work area organized. He brings food on Thursday nights because he claims the vending machine on the administrative level is haunted, and he'd rather cook than interact with it. For the record, the vending machine is not haunted. It does have a mechanical dispense fault on the B4 slot that causes it to drop the wrong item about 30% of the time. I've submitted the repair request twice. But Marcus's chicken tortilla wraps are better than anything in B4, so I've stopped caring. The overnight shift at a pumped storage facility is mostly monitoring. During pump cycles, you're watching intake pressure, flow rate, motor amperage, and reservoir levels. During generation cycles, you're watching penstock pressure, turbine speed, generator output, and power factor. You log readings at 15-minute intervals. You walk the facility twice per shift, once at midnight and once at 4, checking for anything the instruments can't tell you. Unusual noise, leaks, heat, smell. The walk takes about 25 minutes if you do it right. I always do it right. The only unusual thing in the first 6 weeks was something I initially logged as instrument noise on July 8th. During the pump cycle, Unit 1 running, pushing water uphill, drawing power from the grid, I noticed a brief positive fluctuation on the Unit 1 net metering display. Positive, meaning output rather than input. For approximately 4 seconds, the display showed 0.3 megawatts generating rather than consuming. Then it returned to normal. I verified the instrument, tapped the housing, checked the calibration date on the sensor, and confirmed no wiring fault. The instrument was clean. I logged it as anomalous transient suspected instrument noise. Instrument verified. No recurrence observed. That was accurate. There was no recurrence. Not that night. What I didn't do that night, and I want to be honest about this, because it's easy in retrospect to say I should have known immediately, was check the archived logs for similar events. I had no reason to. A 4-second transient on a verified instrument is low on the hierarchy of concerns during a routine pump cycle. I logged it and moved on. I checked the archives 3 weeks later on July 29th after the same thing happened again. Only this time it lasted 12 seconds and read 0.8 megawatts. I pulled 6 weeks of archived logs. The search took me about 40 minutes because the archive interface is 20 years old, and not designed for pattern queries. You essentially have to page through the records manually. I found 7 prior instances of the same transient, all during Unit 1 pump cycles, all between the hours of 2:30 and 3:30 a.m., all between 8 and 14 seconds in duration. The magnitudes ranged from 0.2 to 1.1 megawatts, and when I put the dates on a calendar and looked at the spacing, I had to look twice because I didn't trust the count the first time. 23 days. Every occurrence was separated by 23 days. Not 22, not 24. 23. I sat with that for a long time. I'm not a statistician, but I know what random instrument noise looks like in a log record, and I know that random noise doesn't repeat on a calendar interval. I wrote in my shift notebook, not the digital log, my own personal notebook, the one I keep in my locker. Not random. Interval regular. Source unknown. Then I started the midnight walk. The thing about the midnight walk that matters for later. During the walk, you feel the facility. I know how that sounds. And I'm not being metaphorical. The turbine hall floor transmits vibration up through your boots when the units are running. It's a low-frequency thing, almost below hearing, but it's constant and it's present. And when it's there, you're not aware of it. You only notice it when it's gone, like background noise in a room that's suddenly quiet. You didn't know it was there until it stops. On July 29th, during the midnight walk, the floor was quiet. Unit 1 was running. I could see the output on the hall displays. But the vibration wasn't there. For about 4 minutes during the walk, the floor felt the way it feels when the facility is in transition between pump and generation, or between generation and standby when nothing is moving. Still. Held. Then it came back. The vibration came back, and I hadn't noticed it leave until it returned. I logged the floor vibration anomaly as possible isolation, mount degradation, recommend inspection. That was wrong, but it was what I had. I went back to the control room. Marcus was eating a wrap and watching the gauges. "You feel anything weird just now?" I asked him. He looked at the gauges. "Everything reads fine," he said. "Not the readings, the floor." He looked at me. Then he looked at the floor. "The floor feels like the floor." "Yeah," I said. "Never mind." I sat down at the log terminal and started pulling construction documents. Chapter 3. The Load That Goes Nowhere. The physical document archive for Kessler is in the records room on the administrative level, a room I'd been in maybe 4 times in 11 years. Facility construction documents from the 1980s don't come up much in the daily operation of a working plant. What you need is in the digital system. The paper binders are for historical reference, regulatory compliance, and the kind of thing that only matters when something goes wrong. I went up there on a Tuesday evening, about an hour into the shift, before Marcus arrived. The records room is always unlocked. Fire code. The construction drawing binders are organized by system: civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, and controls. I pulled the electrical binders first. There are 6 of them, each running about 200 pages. 1987 construction set, with 2 amendment packages from 1988 and 1989. I was looking for the Unit 1 metering system, specifically the net meter configuration, because I wanted to see the original installation drawing for the instrument that had given me the transient readings. I found the metering system. The original installation was standard for the era, nothing unusual. But on the same drawing sheet, in the lower right corner of the one-line diagram, I found something that wasn't standard. Bus designation KSR-0. It was shown as a tap off the Unit 1 low voltage bus, downstream of the main transformer, small, roughly 10% of Unit 1's full output capacity. The drawing showed a circuit breaker, a current transformer for metering, and a cable run terminating at a point labelled secondary distribution, KSR-0 service point. In the margin, in pencil, field annotation, probably from installation, someone had written, "Not installed per Revision 3 amendment." I found the Revision 3 amendment package. It confirmed the same thing. KSR-0 was listed under deleted items not installed. The secondary distribution tap was officially cancelled before the facility went into commercial operation. That should have been the end of it. I went back to the control room and pulled up the current one-line diagram from the digital documentation system. KSR-0 did not appear anywhere on it. The current system diagram did not show a secondary tap on the Unit 1 bus. Then I went to the metering historian, the software that archives all the plant's measurement data, and I pulled up the July 29th event in detail. The 0.8 megawatt transient lasted 12 seconds. The metering historian showed the power flow routing. The power moved through KSR-0. Pause. Let me be precise about what that means. The current facility documentation does not show KSR-0 as existing. The 1987 construction documents show it as having been cancelled before installation. But the metering historian, the software that records where power flows within the facility, logged that 0.8 megawatts moved through a circuit designated KSR-0 at 3:04 a.m. on July 29th. A circuit that doesn't exist routed power during a pump cycle when the facility wasn't supposed to be generating power at all. I verified the metering historian against the physical meter. I pulled the historian export and compared it to the printed log I'd filed at 4 a.m. The numbers matched. I had not made a transcription error. The historian and the printed log both showed the KSR-0 routing. I went back to every prior transient event. All 7 of them. Every single one showed the same routing designation in the historian. I sat at the log terminal for a long time after that. The keyboard felt unusually loud in the empty control room. SFX, single keystroke. I made a copy of the historian export and put it in my shift notebook alongside the calendar I'd made. Then I wrote in the notebook, KSR-0 is listed as not installed. KSR-0 is active. KSR-0 has been active for at least 6 weeks. I looked at that sentence for a while. Then I wrote, 6 weeks is how far back the historian shows. Historian depth, 90 days. Going back further tomorrow. That was the night I started doing the 2-log protocol on everything. Every reading I considered relevant from that point forward went into the digital system and into the notebook. I didn't know I was going to need that later. I just knew that whatever was happening at KSR-0 was not something I could afford to have exist only in one place. Chapter 4. Marcus and the safe theory. Marcus showed up the next night with a pan of sweet potato empanadas and an opinion about the Unit 2 vibration issue, which had apparently progressed from something he read online to something he'd measured with the accelerometer app on his phone while I wasn't looking. 0.4 millimeters, he said, setting the pan down and gesturing at the display. Peak to peak. That's above the ISO 10816 alert threshold. You can't use a phone app for ISO compliance measurements, I said. The physics doesn't care what instrument you use. The certification body does. The certification body isn't here at 2 in the morning. This is what a normal overnight shift sounds like. I want you to have that in your head when I tell you what came after. I waited until we'd done the first systems check before I brought up KSR0. I wanted to see if Marcus already knew, and I wanted to see his face when I told him. He already knew. Partially. Yeah, I've seen that, he said when I showed him the historian export. His voice was level, more level than I'd expected. Logged it a couple of times, called it penstock vibration artifact. That's not what it is. I know. He didn't say it defensively. He said it like someone acknowledging a fact they've been sitting with. Hendricks told me to log it as a vibration artifact. About 2 months ago. He said the metering historian has a known fault on the Unit 1 bus. Spurious readings that look like output during pump cycles. He said engineering was aware of it and it was being tracked. Hendricks. Paul Hendricks, day shift supervisor. I'd worked under and alongside Hendricks for 7 years. He was precise, reliable, not warm, but consistently fair. The kind of supervisor you trust because he never surprises you. Has he said anything since? I asked. No, I logged it as a vibration artifact 3 times, and he never followed up. Has he ever shown you the engineering report? The one tracking the fault? Marcus looked at me. No. I went and talked to Hendricks the next morning during shift overlap. I caught him in the hallway outside the control room, 10 minutes before he was going to leave for the day, which was intentional. I wanted a limited time. That KSR-0 routing on the Unit 1 metering historian, I said. Marcus mentioned you'd flagged it as a known instrument fault. Hendricks stopped walking and looked at me. What routing? During pump cycles, recurrent positive output transients are routing through a circuit designated KSR-0. Marcus said you told him, I don't know what you're talking about, Hendricks said. Not dismissively, carefully. I haven't spoken to Marcus about the metering historian. He held my eyes for a moment, then said he needed to get going, and left. Pause. I stood in the hallway for a while after that. Marcus is not a liar. Hendricks is not obviously a liar. But they'd told me 2 contradictory things about the same conversation, with the same specific detail. The metering historian, the Unit 1 bus, and one of them was not remembering correctly, or one of them was choosing not to. I went back to the records room that evening and pulled the 90-day historian XP on. I had to submit an access request to get the full data set. The interactive interface only shows 30 days. The extended export requires supervisor authorization. I used Hendrix's access code, which I had legitimately for shift coverage purposes. I shouldn't have done it without asking him. I'm aware of that. But I had just watched him tell me he didn't know what I was talking about 20 minutes after Marcus described a detailed conversation with him on the same topic, and I needed to know what the full log showed before I decided what to ask. The 90-day historian showed 14 events, not 7, 14. The interval between them, going back 90 days, was consistent. 23 days, give or take 12 hours. The magnitude had been increasing slowly. The first events on record were under 0.5 megawatt. The most recent were approaching 1. Whatever KSR-0 was doing, it had been doing it at Kessler for at least 3 months, and it was doing it more intensely over time. I put the extended export in my shift notebook. I went back to work. I didn't say anything to Marcus that night about what Hendricks had told me. Marcus trusted Hendricks. So did I, until about 48 hours earlier. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I started asking Marcus to untrust someone. Chapter 5. going down to the secondary level. I want to describe the lower service level because the description matters. Below the turbine hall, accessible by a steel staircase on the north end of the hall, is the primary mechanical service level. It's about 60 feet long, maybe 30 feet wide, running parallel to the turbine hall above it. The floor is painted concrete. The walls are exposed, poured concrete, and the ceiling is a forest of piping, conduit, and cable trays serving the equipment above. The space is functional and deliberately unadorned. It smells like machine oil and cold water. You access the lower service level during routine maintenance, during equipment inspections, and during the facility walk. The lower level portion of the walk takes about 8 minutes. You check the lower bearing assemblies, the seal water flows, the draft tube differential pressures, and the lower penstock isolation valves. I had done this walk approximately 800 times. I knew every inch of it. On August 2nd, during the midnight walk, I decided to follow the KSR-0 conduit run. I'd identified it from the construction drawings. The KSR-0 tap came off the Unit 1 bus in the switchgear room on the administrative level, ran down through the control room level, and terminated, per the cancelled installation drawings, at a cable tray stub in the lower service level's southeast corner, near the Unit 1 lower bearing room. I had walked past that corner 800 times. The conduit was there. I had just never had reason to trace it. I found the stub in the southeast corner exactly where the drawings showed it. It terminated in a grey metal junction box mounted on the south wall, about 5 feet up. The junction box was standard issue, the same as 100 others in the facility. I opened it with the maintenance key on my facility ring. Inside was not a cable stub. Inside were active conductors, properly torqued, connecting into a conduit that ran from the junction box into the south wall through a penetration sealed with grey foam compound. Pause. Let me be precise again. The construction drawings showed this conduit run as terminating at the stub, ending there, not connected to anything. What I found was a live, active conduit running through the wall and continuing south, in a direction that, if you know the facility's footprint, is towards the hillside, towards the bedrock. I stood there with the junction box open for a long time. I held my test meter against the conductors and confirmed they were de-energized at that moment. No current flowing. They would only be energized during a KSR-0 event. At 2:17 a.m. on August 2nd, there was no event in progress. But the conductors were there. And they were continuing into the wall. I followed the wall south, past the end of the Unit 1 bearing room, past the lower penstock isolation valve bank, to the point where the lower service level ends and the south wall becomes the boundary of the as-built facility. There is a fire door in that wall. I have walked through that fire door on every midnight facility walk for 4 years. It leads to a short corridor, maybe 20 feet, with a utility sink and a chemical storage cabinet for the seal water treatment chemicals. I have been in that corridor hundreds of times. I went through the fire door, past the utility sink, past the chemical cabinet. On the right side of the corridor there is a section of wall that I had always registered as a concrete panel, slightly different texture than the poured walls elsewhere, but facilities are full of repair patches and texture variations. I had never looked at it closely. Tonight I looked at it closely. It was a door, a very good door, concrete faced. The surface treatment matched almost exactly, but the door frame was there if you were looking for it. A thin seam, factory sealed, running about 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and on the right side of the frame, low, almost at floor level, was a small flush mount handle. The handle was not corroded. The hinge seam was not fouled. The door had been used recently. I tried the handle. The door opened. The corridor beyond was not large, maybe 12 feet wide, 8 feet tall, running into the hillside at a slight downward angle. The floor was smooth, poured and finished, not rough cut. The walls were the same. Conduit runs along the right-hand wall, tracking the same direction as the KSR-0 cable I'd been following. Fluorescent fixtures on the ceiling, old style, the same yellowed tube type as the lower service level. They were off. The corridor was dark. I used my flashlight. I walked in about 40 feet. The corridor curved gently left and then opened into a larger space. Roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, low ceiling, maybe 9 feet. In the center was a transformer housing, not the compact type you see in distribution boxes. A floor-mounted unit, probably a 500 kilovolt amperes dry-type step-down transformer. Behind it, a conduit bundle, maybe 8 runs, various sizes, entered the floor through a concrete-sealed penetration in the center of the room. The seal was recent. The color of the foam compound was bright gray, not the aged yellow-gray of older fills. Within the last 2 years, maybe less. There was no other equipment in the room. No panels, no control devices, no obvious load. Just the transformer and the conduits disappearing into the floor. I pointed my flashlight at the floor penetration for a long time. Then I turned around and walked back out the way I'd come. I pulled the door closed behind me. I went back to the control room and I sat at the log terminal L, and I did not type anything for several minutes. Then I started typing. I did not log the door or the corridor in the digital system. I logged the midnight walk as completed, no anomalies. I wrote the door, the corridor, the transformer, and the floor penetration in my shift notebook in as much detail as I could remember. I drew a rough plan sketch, then I printed the 4 a.m. log, filed it, and went to find the phone number for the original construction firm. Chapter 6. What the Reservoir Knows. The construction firm listed on the Kessler documents was Haverstock and Delmar Engineering, based out of Chattanooga. I found this out on a Thursday morning after my shift, sitting in my truck in the facility parking lot with my phone. Haverstock and Delmar no longer existed. They'd been acquired by a larger firm who'd been acquired again, and the current corporate entity was called Piedmont Infrastructure Group, headquartered in Charlotte. I called Piedmont's main number and explained that I was a senior technician at a facility originally designed by Haverstock and Delmar in the 1980s and that I had a documentation question about the original construction. They transferred me to their historical records department, which is apparently one woman named Deborah who handles all legacy project inquiries, and Deborah very kindly gave me the name of the project lead on the Kessler original build, a man named Gerald Calloway. Calloway had retired in 2003. Deborah, bless her, found me a phone number listed in the firm's legacy contact files. I called it that afternoon. He answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded like a man in his mid-70s, clear voice, slightly deliberate cadence, the kind of person who takes time before answering questions. I introduced myself, explained where I worked, and told him I was trying to understand the KSR-0 secondary distribution tap, why the original drawings showed it, and why the Revision 3 amendment cancelled it. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone trying to remember, the pause of someone deciding. "Why are you asking about KSR-0, he said. "Because I've been seeing readings routed through it during overnight pump cycles, and I'm trying to understand the infrastructure." Another pause. Then, Are you calling from the facility? No, I'm in my truck. Personal cell. All right. He was quiet for a moment. KSR0 was not cancelled. I need you to understand that distinction clearly. The Revision 3 amendment says not installed. Those are not the same words as cancelled. I didn't say anything. I was writing in my notebook. In 1984, the original Valley Development Plan for Osage included 2 concurrent projects. Calloway continued. Kessler was one of them, the pumped storage facility. The other was a research installation. Federal, I won't tell you which agency because I was never told directly, and the paperwork I saw didn't specify. The installation was to be sited below the water table, accessed through a bedrock corridor from the Kessler lower service level. It was designed to be powered from the Kessler secondary bus. KSR-0, I said. Yes. The secondary bus was installed. It was installed during construction. The Revision 3 amendment was filed to remove it from documentation. Not because it wasn't built, but because it was no longer supposed to appear in the civilian facility record. There was a federal documentation protocol attached to the Kessler project that I'd never seen on any other civilian job. Certain infrastructure items were to be omitted from all regulatory filings and operations documents post-commissioning. KSR0 was on that list. I stopped writing. I looked out through the windshield at the Osage Valley. The research installation, I said. Is it still active? When I retired in 2003, my understanding was that the installation had been decommissioned in 1991. The power supply was to be de-energized and sealed at the Kessler Junction. He paused. That was my understanding. The readings I'm seeing started in 2019. A very long silence. Then my understanding was wrong, Calloway said finally. Or the decommissioning wasn't permanent. I asked him what the installation was for, what they were researching. He said he didn't know. He said the project documentation he'd seen described it as environmental monitoring, but that the power requirements for environmental monitoring did not match the infrastructure he'd been asked to design. You don't need a 500 kilovolt amperes transformer for weather sensors. He said he'd asked once, early in the project, and had been told that the specific scope of the installation was outside his need to know, and that he should focus on the electrical design parameters he'd been given. He'd done exactly that. For 40 years, he'd done exactly that. Before he hung up, he said, I'd recommend you stop looking into this. Not as a threat, as the advice of a very tired old man who had made his own decision about what to do with what he knew, and was extending that advice with a kind of hollow courtesy. I'll think about it, I said. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after the call. The upper reservoir was visible from where I'd parked, that flat, wrong-looking body of water sitting on top of the ridge like something deposited there by a decision nobody fully explained. I'd looked at it 1,000 times without really seeing it. Something below this facility had been drawing power since 2019, for 4 years before I noticed it, and it had been drawing more as time went on, and someone had built it, and then been told not to remember they'd built it. Chapter 7. The 23-day cycle is a heartbeat. I spent the next 4 days pulling every data source I could access. The metering historian at Kessler only goes back 90 days in the standard interface, but there's an extended archive, raw log files stored on a network server in the administrative level records room that goes back to the historian systems installation in 2011. Accessing it required physical access to the server cabinet, which I had, and a read password printed in the system manual, which is kept in the records room binder. I went in on an off night during the first hour of Marcus's solo shift and pulled the full extended archive onto a USB drive. I took it home and spent 2 days with a spreadsheet. What I found: KSR-0 routing events going back to 2019, totaling 64 confirmed events over 4 years. The interval between events in 2019 was 23 days. By 2021, the interval had shortened to 21 days. By 2023, it was 19 days. By the time of my most recent log entry, the interval was running between 18 and 19 days, and the average event duration had grown from 7 seconds to 41 seconds. The megawatt draw had grown proportionally. 0.2 megawatts in 2019, 1.4 megawatts by the last event before I started this exit debrief. It was accelerating. Whatever it was doing with that power, it was doing it more frequently and at greater intensity. I plotted the numbers on a graph. The curve was not erratic. It was smooth. It was not increasing in random jumps. It was increasing the way a biological process increases. Gradually, continuously, following a growth curve. I stared at that graph for a very long time. Then I did something else. I pulled the regional grid event records from the Tennessee Valley Authority's public incident database, publicly available if you know where to look, and I searched for unexplained load anomalies in the Osage Valley distribution area over the past 4 years. I found 2. The first was March 14th, 2022. A brief voltage sag across 3 distribution feeders in the Ridgecroft area was listed as unidentified load anomaly, resolved without intervention. Duration 4 minutes. Estimated load 8 to 12 megawatts. The second was November 3rd, 2023. A similar event, slightly larger. Cause listed as transient load, source not identified. Duration 6 minutes. Estimated load 10 to 15 megawatts. I checked both dates against my KSR-0 event log. Both dates were KSR-0 event dates. On those 2 nights, the KSR-0 draw had exceeded what Kessler's Unit 1 could provide during the pump cycle, and the excess had come directly from the regional grid. The facility below the bedrock had pulled power from beyond its dedicated supply line. I sat back from my laptop and looked at the graph again. Whatever was down there had needed Kessler's power for 4 years. On 2 occasions, it had needed more than Kessler could give. It had taken from the broader grid without any kind of authorization or metering, an invisible load on a network that was not supposed to know it existed. And it was still growing. I called Marcus that evening before the shift started. "I need you to do me a favor tonight," I said. "I need you to pull the Unit 1 lower bearing inspection log from the last 6 months and flag every entry where I noted floor vibration anomalies." "Why?" "I want to cross-reference something." "Are you going to tell me what?" "Tomorrow," I said. "I promise. Tonight I need the bearing log." He pulled it. When I got in that night, he had the entries flagged on the display. Every floor vibration anomaly I'd logged coincided within a few minutes with a KSR-0 event. Marcus stood next to me and looked at the display. "That's not bearing vibration," he said. "No," I said. "It's not." "Then what is it?" I told him about Callaway. I told him about the archived events. I told him about the corridor behind the fire door. I didn't show him the corridor. I didn't want Marcus anywhere near it yet. But I told him it existed and what I'd found in it. He was quiet for a long time. "You need to report this," he said. "To whom?" "Hendricks, to start. Hendricks told you to log the events as a vibration artifact and told me he'd never spoken to you about the metering historian." both in the same 24-hour period. Marcus didn't have an answer for that. I'm going to report it, I said. I just need a few more days to understand what I'm reporting. I don't think Marcus believed that was the right call. I don't think it was the right call, in retrospect. But it was the call I made, and I made it because I needed to know if the corridor had changed since my first visit, if anything in that room had responded to my presence, before I handed the information to someone whose relationship with it I couldn't fully read. I went back down to the corridor on the night of August 7th. I told Marcus I was doing the midnight walk. I turned off the radio. The lights in the corridor were on. I had left them off. I stood at the entrance for a long time without going in. The lights were the same yellow fluorescent fixtures I'd seen with my flashlight on the first visit. Now they were on. From the entrance I could see the curve of the corridor and the edge of the circular room beyond. The transformer housing was visible from where I stood, lit from above by the working fixtures. I did not go in. I stood at the entrance for what I later estimated was about 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, I was aware of the floor. It was still. Not normal operating still. The turbines were running above me, and the floor in the lower service level always transmitted that vibration. But standing at the entrance to the corridor, the floor was completely still. The way it gets during the transition. Then, from somewhere below the floor of the circular room, below the conduit bundle, below the sealed penetration, there was a sound. I want to be precise about this because I've thought about it many times since. It was not a mechanical sound. It was not a voice. It was a frequency, low, sustained, almost below hearing, but distinguishable from the turbine vibration above because it was slower, periodic. It cycled with an interval of roughly 3 to 4 seconds, in and out. Not breathing. I'm not calling it breathing, because that is not what I know it was. A pressure change. Something below the floor is pressurizing and releasing at a regular interval. 11.7 megawatts, later that night. I know what it was doing with the power. I walked back to the control room and sat down. Chapter 8. Hendricks comes to the night shift. Hendricks arrived at 2:27 a.m. on August 9th. In 11 years, Paul Hendricks had never come into the facility during the overnight rotation. He was a 7 to 3 supervisor. His domestic arrangements, as far as I knew, involved a wife and 2 kids in Ridgecroft proper. He had no reason to be at Kessler at 2:27 a.m. on a Friday. He came through the main entrance with his badge, which logged his arrival in the access control system. He walked directly to the control room. He looked like someone who had driven a while to get here and was choosing his words carefully. "Darnell," he said. "Good. Can we sit down?" Marcus started to say something. Hendricks looked at him with a calm that was not aggressive but was absolute. "Would you mind doing the South Penstock drain valve check? I want to get the inspection date current before the week's out." Marcus looked at me. I nodded. He left. Hendricks sat in the chair across the log terminal from me. He set a folder on the console between us but didn't open it. "I want to do an informal log review," he said. "Walk me through your digital entries from the last month." I walked him through the digital log. I'd been careful. Everything I'd investigated had been either not logged digitally or logged with the standard cover entries. Vibration artifact, instrument verification, normal walk results. The digital log from the last month was clean. He asked me about the 90-day historian pull I'd done with his access code. I said I needed the extended data to cross-reference a recurring meter transient and that I'd used the shift coverage code as the protocol allowed. "What did you find?" he asked. Recurring positive transients on the Unit 1 net meter, consistent with the entries I'd logged as vibration artifact, per standard practice.
He held my eyes for a moment. Standard practice, he repeated. Yes. He looked at the folder, then he said, "Have you made any outside contacts regarding facility documentation, equipment identification queries, that kind of thing?" There it was, 48 hours after the Callaway call. He knew. Not from my personal cell, I was almost certain of that. From somewhere else. I called the legacy project firm about an equipment ID on the lower service level, I said. Historical records, nothing unusual. Hendricks nodded slowly. He opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet, a printed transfer authorization. Regional Operations Office header. My name. The Sequoia Generating Station in Saudi Daisy, 90 minutes south. Senior Technician, overnight rotation. Full benefits, equivalent grade, effective September 1st. This was approved at the regional level this week, he said. Given your tenure here, they wanted to make sure you knew the offer was strong. Equal position, better commute to Knoxville. He said this last part simply, without emphasis. He knew about the split residence with Tamara. He knew a lot of things for someone who claimed not to remember a conversation with Marcus about the metering historian. "I'd like time to review it," I said. "Of course." He closed the folder and pushed it across the console toward me. "Nothing's urgent. Take the week." He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked back toward the main entrance. At the control room door, he stopped without turning around. "Darnell, whatever you're following in the logs," he paused. "The logs don't go far enough back to tell the whole story. And you can't go far enough below grade to see what's down there without equipment you don't have access to. What I'm saying is, the picture you have is partial." He left. Marcus came back from the drain valve check about 10 minutes later. He looked at the transfer form on the console. "What's that?" he asked. "Career opportunity," I said. He didn't ask anything else. We ran the rest of the shift in the kind of quiet that happens when both people in a room have decided not to say what they're actually thinking. When Marcus left at 6:15, I sat at the log terminal and thought about what Hendricks had said. The logs don't go far enough back. I couldn't argue with that. The digital historian started in 2011, which meant I had no record of whatever predated it. If KSR0 had been running since its installation in 1987, the true scope of the event history was completely beyond what I could access. And the picture you have is partial. That was not the same thing as "you're wrong." That was the same thing as "you found a piece of this." I looked at the transfer form. Sequoia Generating Station, 90 minutes south of Tamara. I thought about the corridor lights being on when I got there. I thought about the floor going still. I thought about the pressure cycling from below the sealed penetration. I did not sign the transfer form that night. Chapter 9. The Last Night / the Draw Event. During Generation 1 came back on August 12th, 2 nights before this exit interview. I had not signed the form. I had not committed to anything. I told myself I needed one more shift to close out my documentation, to update the notebook, to make sure I had what I needed, and then I would sign and be done with it. That was what I told myself. Marcus and I ran the first half of the shift normally. The pump cycle came in at 11:30 p.m. as dispatched. Unit 1 pulls 72 megawatts from the grid, moving water uphill. Unit 2 in standby. Readings clean. Marcus ran the midnight walk while I held the control room. At 1:43 a.m., the facility transitioned to generation mode per a dispatch request. Regional grid was showing peak demand earlier than forecast. Hot night, AC load spiking in the valley. We reversed. Pump cycle ended. Unit 1 began spinning up for generation. The 90-second transition period began. I was at the log terminal running the transition checklist. Item 1. Penstock isolation valves, confirmed open. Item 2. Draft tube air admission, confirmed closed. Item 3. Generator excitation. The KSR-0 circuit breaker in the switchgear room opened. I know this because the switchgear monitoring display lit up with the status change. The circuit breaker that protected the KSR-0 tap, a circuit that was not supposed to exist, had just opened, meaning the KSR-0 line was now de-energized during the 90-second transition. While the plant was moving from the pump to the generator, I sat very still. The Unit 1 net meter showed power starting to flow in the generation direction. Water was hitting the turbines and the generator was picking up load. And then, superimposed on the generation signal, the KSR-0 metering showed an event. 11.7 megawatts. Routing through KSR-0 in the generation direction, coming from the plant, being drawn by something downstream. During the generation, not during the pump cycle, during the generation. The plant was putting power on the grid and simultaneously drawing 11 megawatts to KSR-0. Not from the grid, from the generation, from the turbines themselves. The Unit 1 output meter dropped by exactly 11.7 megawatts. Whatever was happening below the floor, it was taking that power directly off the generator bus. The grid was receiving less than the dispatch order required. We were out of compliance with the generation obligation. It lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Then the KSR-0 circuit breaker closed, re-energized the line, and the Unit 1 output meter climbed back to the dispatch requirement. I had not touched anything. I looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the displays with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Very still, not panicked, processing. That shouldn't be able to happen, he said. No. 11 megawatts doesn't move itself. No. He looked at me. What do we do? I told him to hold the control room. I told him I was going to do the midnight walk. I told him to log the output deviation as transient load imbalance, cause under investigation, and to call me on the radio if anything changed. You're going down to the corridor, he said. Not a question. I'm going to look at it. Don't go in. I know. I went down the staircase to the turbine hall. The floor was vibrating normally under my boots. The turbines were running. The harmonic was there. Everything was reading as functional. I continued to the lower service level. At the south end, through the fire door, past the utility sink and the chemical cabinet. The corridor door was open. Not ajar. Open. Fully extended, pushed back against the right-hand wall of the corridor, as if held in place. The lights inside were on, the same yellowed fluorescent fixtures. The corridor stretched ahead of me, curving left. I could see the transformer housing in the room beyond. I stood at the threshold. The floor was still. Not the turbine still. The other still. The deep is still. From below the floor of the circular room, the pressure cycling was continuing, but the interval was different. Not 3 to 4 seconds. Shorter. 2 seconds. In and out. More rapid. Something had changed. I stood at the threshold and did not go in. I want to be clear about this. I did not go in. I stood at the threshold with my flashlight held at my side, pointing at the corridor floor, not using it because the lights were on, and I didn't want to be the thing that made a noise. From below the sealed floor penetration, from whatever was consuming 11.7 megawatts during a generation cycle in a facility that had never experienced anything like this before. From below all of it, the pressure sound stopped. 90 seconds of silence. Exactly 90 seconds. The length of the facility transition period. The held breath gap between pump and generation. And then it began again. Slower, deeper, longer intervals. Like something had rested. Like something had adjusted to a new scale. I walked back to the control room. I did not run. I made myself not run, because I do not know what running would have signified to whatever was listening to my footsteps on the service level floor, and I was not willing to find out. Marcus was at the console. He looked up when I came in. "Well," he said. "Corridors open," I said. "Lights are on. Did you go in?" "No." He let out a breath. We ran the rest of the generation cycle without incident. The 4 a.m. log showed clean output. The KSR-0 event was in my physical notebook. It was not in the digital log. At the end of the shift, Marcus said, "Sign the transfer form, Darnell." I looked at him. "Whatever it is, it's been there longer than we have," he said. "It was there before Hendrix. It was there before the historian. It's been drawing power since 1987, and it's still here, and it has been noticing you." He paused. "Sign the form." I sat with that. Then I said, "What about you?" "I haven't been in the corridor," he said. "I haven't traced the conduit runs. I haven't called Callaway." He kept his voice level. "I've been careful about what I've touched, and I'm going to keep being careful." I understood what he was saying, and I hated it, because it was probably right. I went home and I slept for 4 hours, and then I drove to a bank in a town 40 miles from Kessler, and I rented a safety deposit box. I put in it a USB drive with the extended historian export, the printed log pages from every KSR-0 event night, my physical notebook with all entries from the last 8 weeks, and the construction drawing sheets showing the original KSR-0 installation. I sealed the box. I kept the key. Then I drove back to Kessler and I signed the transfer form. And this morning, August 14th, I sat down to record this exit interview. Chapter 10. What I wrote and what I didn't. I have told you what's in the official exit interview that I'm recording right now. All of it. Because the exit interview is a transcript of what a technician remembers and what a technician observed. And I have been a thorough technician for 11 years. and I'm not going to stop being thorough because it's inconvenient. I want to tell you what's not in the official digital logs. The official digital logs show nothing unusual on any of the nights I've described. I checked after I pulled my own notebook entries. I pulled the metering historian for the dates in question, the dates I personally verified anomalous readings, the dates I used a calibrated test meter on confirmed active conductors. The official historian shows clean pump cycles, normal generation, no KSR-0 routing events on any of those nights. The 14 events I found in the 90-day pull, gone. The 64 events in the extended archive, gone. The August 12th event showed 11.7 megawatts during the generation cycle, not present. The historian shows Unit 1 operating at the dispatch requirement all night, uninterrupted. Every KSR-0 event has been removed from the official record, not just the ones I documented, all of them, going back to 2019. Hendrix is precise, but he is not that precise. No human records technician works retrospectively across 4 years of historical data in the 48 hours between Calloway's phone call and Hendrix's nighttime visit. No one at the regional operations office did it between my signing the transfer form and my arrival here this morning. The system that manages the official record is not Hendrix. It is not the regional office. Whatever manages those logs is the same system that noticed when I traced the conduit run. It is the same system that turned the corridor lights on. It knew I was looking. It removed what I was looking at. It left my memories and my physical notebook intact because it did not need to address those. Until now. I have the evidence in a safety deposit box at First Commerce Bank in Mill Haven, Tennessee, on Route 72, box number 417. The key is in my truck's glove compartment, in an envelope taped behind the owner's manual. I'm saying this on the record, in the exit interview, in the audio archive. I know what I just did. I know this recording goes into the administrative archive, which is networked to the same system that erased 4 years of historian data before I could finish my notice period. I know that whatever monitors these transmissions, the same process that flagged my Callaway call, that opened a corridor door, that paced its pressure cycle to the transition interval, that drew from the regional grid when Kessler's capacity wasn't enough. I know it can hear this. I told myself I was putting the location on record as protection, documentation that exists outside any one person. I told myself that if anything happens, someone will find this interview and know where to look. I'm sitting here now, at the end of this debrief, and I'm not sure that's why I said it. I'm not sure I didn't say it, the same way you repeat something out loud that you know, somewhere below the level of reasoning, you were always going to say. The way a technician always finishes the checklist, even when the room goes quiet and the floor stops vibrating, and every sensible instinct says to walk back up the stairs. I've worked here for 11 years. I know this place. I know its rhythms. I know the quality of its silences. I don't know how fast it processes new information. I don't know what it does with an address. Millhaven is 40 miles away. The transfer effective date is September 1st. I have 17 days. I've been careful for a long time, and I'm going to keep being careful. I check the locks twice. I don't take the same route home 2 nights in a row. I've called Tamara more this week than I have in 6 months, and I haven't told her why, and she hasn't asked. And I think we both understand that whatever was going wrong between us is a solvable problem in a way that this isn't. The box is in Millhaven. The key is in my truck. This recording is in the archive. 3 points of a triangle. I don't know which point is safest. I know what the facility sounds like at full generation. I know what it sounds like when it's pumping, when it's transitioning, when it's idle. I know every frequency it produces as a function of its designed operation. The frequency of the floor penetration is not in any design document. I know that now. I've known it since the first night I heard it. But I've been thinking since August 12th about the way it changed after the 11.7 megawatt draw. The way the interval slowed and deepened. The way it sounded like something resting before it adjusts to a new scale. I've been thinking about the growth curve on my graph, the smooth acceleration, the way a biological process expands. And I've been thinking about Calloway's voice on the phone, that hollow, tired courtesy. I'd recommend you stop looking into this. He stopped looking in 2003. The events didn't restart until 2019. I don't know what happened in between. I don't know what happens between when something stops being watched and when it decides it's ready to be seen. This concludes my exit interview. My tenure at Kessler Pumped Storage Station ends August 31st. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I wish the facility well. The sting. I drove home the long way through Millhaven just to see the bank, just to confirm it was still there, still ordinary, still closed on a Wednesday afternoon with the lights off inside. The lights were on.